We're going to go ahead and start the morning session. I hope everybody is finding their stay in Minneapolis. So far, so good. It is not snowing outside. It is just raining, so that's the good news. So for those of you that weren't here last night, my name is Rich Wagner. I currently serve as president of the American Technical Education Association. I'm also president of Dunwoody College of Technology, the host institution for this year's national conference. And we're going to start the day off today with a panel discussion, and we're going to talk about the role of technical education in creating companies and the impact our graduates have when they leave our types of institutions. And I'm very, very honored and very pleased to have with us four alum of Dunwoody College, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking. I'm going to spend a lot of time facilitating. So I think what we'll do to start things off is I'll ask each of the panelists to give a quick introduction of themselves and a little bit about their educational background and some of their career highlights. And we'll start all the way at the end with Ted Ferrara. And Ted and Mike and Ray and Dale, if you want to talk about your affiliation with Dunwoody too, that'd be great. As a trustee, et cetera.
Okay, great. Thank you, Rich. Pleasure to be here this morning, ladies and gentlemen. When I talk about my educational background, I think it's important to understand the context of it. I grew up in a family that owned a business. And so we're in the heating and air conditioning contracting business here in the Twin Cities. And since I was 11 years old, I spent every summer vacation working in the family business. So my career trajectory was kind of determined early. I loved the business. And as I went through high school, there was the expectation that I would go on to some post-secondary education. So the decision was to either look at the School of Engineering at the University of Minnesota, a very fine school, or Dunwoody College of Technology. And I chose Dunwoody for both good reasons and maybe less than perfect reasons. The good reason is it was, at the time, I think the most direct way of getting what I wanted in my education, and that is to learn what we did for our customers, to understand what we're actually doing in terms of providing products and services for the customers of our family business, and understand the technology. The not so good reason was I was a really terrible student in high school. I was not at all academically oriented, and I looked at the University of Minnesota as a four-year engineering program, and I thought, wow, you know, they're gonna make me take all that stuff that I didn't want to take in high school and just more. It's just an extension, only worse. But if I go to Dunwoody, I'm going to learn, you know, real stuff and practical knowledge, applied technology, something I was interested in. And I got way more than I bargained for. I actually learned that I could be successful in school. And a spark was lit in me to actually begin to read books on my own and to study on my own and just have a thirst for knowledge. So went to Dunwoody, graduated from the Refrigeration and Appliance Repair program in 1977. Subsequent to that, I went on for a Bachelor of Arts degree. I'm a big believer in the liberal arts and liberal arts education. And then Dunwoody's a private not-for-profit school. My Bachelor of Arts was from a public institution, state school. Then I went on to get a professional degree, a master's in business from a private institution out of state. And then after that, came back a few years later and decided I wanted to do a little infill, so I got another technical degree, a Bachelor of Science in Applied Mathematics. If you hear anything falling right now, it's probably all my high school teachers passing out that I would go on and have, 4 post-secondary degrees. am currently on the Board of Trustees of Dunwoody College of Technology and am the chairman of the board through the end of this calendar or fiscal year.
Thanks, Ted. Mike?
Good morning. I appreciate the opportunity to be here this morning. I'll try and do similar to Ted, a little background from an educational standpoint, and also give you a little information about the company that I own and run. So from an educational standpoint, I was what was considered at the time a non-traditional student at Dunwoody. I had gone in a little different order than Ted. I went and got my liberal arts degree first and graduated from the University of Minnesota with a BA in history and a minor in English and a minor in political science. Not necessarily where you find a lot of electrical contractors getting their education. Graduating from college with a liberal arts degree, the job market can sometimes be challenging, and so I was encouraged by my father to maybe get more of a hands-on learning experience, and encouraged me to go to Dunwoody, which I did. I graduated from Dunwoody in 1985. At that time, again, had spent now almost 7 years in post-secondary education and really needed to find a job, and I did. I actually started with a company called Hunt Electric. 29 years later, I'm the majority owner and CEO. I was actually promoted to president in 1995. Worked my way through started as a management trainee. Worked my way through a series of different jobs with the company. Took over as president in 1995, and myself and a group of 4 others bought the company in 2001. Subsequent to Dunwoody, in the mid-90s, knowing that I kind of wanted to run a business, and thinking I probably needed a little more knowledge, I did go back to the Carlson School and get an MBA in finance. So that's kind of my educational career. Hunt Electric, when I took it over in '95, we did about $50 million in business. We do about $250 million now. We do work all across the United States, about 150 management and administrative people and 600 to 800 electricians. So the company's grown, and we've all been very fortunate, but we got a great group of employees and partners. I couldn't have done what I've done, and I don't think I could have helped the company do what it's done without all the different educational experiences I had. The liberal arts education was very important to me. What I learned at Dunwoody in the electrical construction and maintenance program, it's what we do. So it's where I learned, what we actually do as a business. And I think the MBA gave me the pieces I needed to actually run what I consider a fairly large business. So it's been a lot of fun. Continues to be a lot of fun.
Ray?
Good morning. One thing I'd like to say before I start my history is the jobs you all do are extremely important to us in industry. So I really appreciate the commitments that you all make to building the resources of people that we need to succeed in business, and I really appreciate that. My background, I started out, grew up on a small farm in southern Minnesota, went to high school down there, met a gentleman that was a tool maker early on. I was one of these kids that was in love with cars. I wanted to build cars, and he was a tool maker that worked in Rochester and was building cars, and I thought, that's really what I want to do. So my goal very early became to get to Dunwoody to learn the tool-making trade so that I could build cars. Well, I scratched and clawed and got my way to Minneapolis and got to Dunwoody. I met a guy when I got out of Dunwoody, and I started in business right out of trade school, not knowing anything about business. And so I started going to various night courses at the university, took courses at St. Thomas, took Dale Carnegie courses, and numerous other places that had things available that I could learn from. Joined various civic organizations to learn that way, and slowly built my way up. In 1965, I was 23, I started Tape Incorporated. I built that company up to about 135 people. Ended up building automation equipment primarily for the auto industry. Had employees in Detroit, and it was extremely stressful. Company in Great Britain decided they wanted it worse than I did, so I ended up selling it in 1987. Tried to retire, did a few things, took up photography, went to Arizona, studied photography. There's some great photography schools out there. And a few years later, I decided I wanted to get back into business. So in 1993, I came back and bought what's now Teamvantage. That company, we manufacture, we're a contract manufacturer for the medical industry and the defense industry. And then in 2003, I bought another company, Custom Mold and Design. Gentleman that went to school here at Dunwoody built a real nice company. He sold it. The company that bought it tipped it upside down, so I bought it, and we now employ about 80 people in that company. I served on the board at Dunwoody for a little over 10 years. I've been a bank director for 2 different banks for about almost 35 years. So that's kind of it.
Dale?
My name is Dale Nordquist. Apologize, I lost my voice yesterday and I'm just getting it back, so I'll stumble through this a bit. I graduated from Dunwoody in 1974 from the Industrial Electronics program. A lot of similarities to things I've heard here. I grew up on a farm. I chose a technical education or a technical school because I was too impatient to sit in a college and listen to lectures. I needed to use my hands and learn a practical skill because that's how I grew up on the farm. It was teaching myself. So I went through the electronics program, actually used that knowledge, and that knowledge got me my first job at Eastman Kodak as an electronic technician, fixing things. I think one of the advantages coming out of a technical school is that you're immediately relevant. The first day I started, I was working on things, and I compare that to my sons who graduated at college with business degrees, and you're immediately qualified to learn what to do because you're not relevant yet with a business degree. So there's one fundamental building block of a technical degree versus a 4-year type program. I was telling people at another table, I'm a contradiction to myself. Always said I wasn't going to be a salesman. I hated salespeople. And then I proceeded to become a salesperson. About 2 years after I graduated, I was in technical sales, electronic sales, microelectronics, very high-tech things. Actually attended Stanford University for a few weeks on technology, executive training, kind of an immersion program that opened my eyes and ears to a lot of things to want to continue to learn. Became a corporate officer and a vice president of sales at about 28. Stayed in that career for about 25 years in international sales as well as domestic sales expansion. Learned a lot of expertise of turning around companies and strategically repositioning companies. That didn't come from Dunwoody for some reason, but I did learn that along the way. And then another contradiction, I had always told people I didn't want to be CEO of a company. I didn't want to run a company. I was enjoying my position of where I worked on an executive level. And then I proceeded to become a CEO in 2007. And that's what I'm doing today. I was a CEO of Zeriba Systems. It was a strategic turnaround and reposition, small public company. We sold and sold myself out of a job and got into my second CEO job 4 years ago at Geotek in Rochester, Minnesota. We've grown that from 18 million to 40 million and grew our employee base from 50 to 150 employees down there. So that company's on a pretty big growth trajectory. First job where I'm not using any electronics. We make composite fiberglass beams. However, our cross arms on tops of electric utility poles hold up electrical conductors that have hundreds of thousands of volts in them, so I still have a little bit of association to my background yet.
Thank you for the introduction, everybody. So, one of the things that we see a lot of is graduates of our programs go on and they go out and they start to achieve success. What kind of reflections do you have on why do you think that so many of our companies and in particular our technical graduates go out and start their own companies? Any observations from your experience on why you think so many companies are started and run by graduates of technical colleges? And maybe Mike, we'll start with you this time.
Well, I guess in my experience, and let me take a step back, you know, I mentioned a little bit about Hunt Electric. We have, and I should have actually added it up, but probably in our management staff, 20 or 25 Dunwoody graduates work for Hunt Electric. 4 or 5 of my partners now, there's 8 of us now, are all Dunwoody grads. I think there's something that goes along with the mentality of kind of, you know, Dale mentioned it, you know, he couldn't sit in a classroom. He needed to go and when he thought about his education, go someplace where he could work with his hands and not sit in the classroom. I think there's something about the people who think about an education that's more than the lecture. Not a number of us have all done that too, but there's I think a level of ambition and maybe it's just impatience that kind of goes along with you know, wanting to get an education where you actually work at a lab desk and go out and kind of do that hands-on learning piece that maybe leads people to be the kind of person when they get out into a job setting that they kind of rise to the top. They're motivated, they're impatient, they're ambitious, and I think, you know, that's been my observation.
Ray?
In my experience, I worked my way through school, so I had several jobs while I was going to school, and I found that there was always somebody with more seniority than myself to get the real interesting work to do. And the real motivator for me to go into business for myself was to continue learning. And I think that's why I'm still in business today, because there are so many learning opportunities, and I have created in my business basically a culture of learning. And so for me, it was the desire to continue to learn the trade. What you can teach the students are limited in resources, mostly financial. So there's a lot to learn once the student gets out of school, and I guess that would be my situation. I don't know about others, but it worked for me.
Okay. Dale?
Well, other than what others have said, I think one thing that maybe positions technical schools to produce people that start companies, own and build companies, you know, business is formed around one of two things. It's either formed around a product, innovation, or a service. A lot of the technical trades and curriculum that's taught in technical schools gives somebody a specific craft or trade, like it's HVAC or it's auto mechanics. That's a service and that's a business. So if you can graduate, be very knowledgeable about that particular discipline, that value, you can all of a sudden hire others, you can lead others, you can build a whole business around it. And those types of trades tend to be small businesses in the U.S., whether it's HVAC companies or electrical companies or auto mechanic or body shops and those types of things. So I think technical schools are positioned with the right grads that are coming through to be in a wonderful position where they graduate with this knowledge base that makes them relevant. And if they continue to learn, like Ray said, they can expand that into a business opportunity very, very quickly for those that want to.
Great. Ted?
And I kind of tag along here, I would say that for a lot of people who start, technically based businesses, it comes down to the belief on their part that they can do the job better. They're working somewhere, they're prepared, they've developed technical knowledge, and they see an opportunity and a market opportunity, and they think, you know what, I can do it better. So I think at the risk of a gross oversimplification, I think that plays a large role in the startup of businesses. I think in terms of those of us who came into business to run the businesses that have already been started, there has been a little bit,
Ted, can you use the mic, please? I'm sorry.
Sure. For those of us who've come into existing businesses to run the businesses, there has been kind of a shift in the last few years that business is becoming more of a science. There, are still plenty of opportunities for artists, okay, in the broader sense, but a lot of success in business today, a lot of the improvement in business comes along with being able to look at something systematically, looking at it quantitatively and measuring it and improving it. And these are, in many cases, the basics that are learned in a technology curriculum. You're not afraid of the technology, and you're not afraid of quantitative thinking, and that's the basis for a lot of improvement as businesses become more science-based.
As you grew in your careers and you moved from a technician into kind of the business owner operator, what gaps existed and how did you fill those gaps as you went from just a person who was primarily a technician to a person who was going to be running or the business or managing people? And we'll start with you, Ray, this time. We'll start with Ray.
Check my notes here, see what I was going to respond to that. I think the gaps in the getting from the technical side of the business to the managerial side, we concentrate on all of the fundamentals of the skill sets necessary, whether it be auto body, whether it be machine tool, whether it be HVAC, whatever it might be. The 2 years that are spent in the trade school are really necessary. There really isn't time to go off into all of the business school aspects of running a business. And yet, once you start a business, it's very necessary. And in my case, I got some advice to start going to some business school classes and spent an awful lot of time at that. So there's a gap there, but I don't think that to do a great job of getting these students ready, the technical side of their education is extremely important, and for the few that decide to go into business for themselves, I think that's a whole separate education.
Dale? Yep.
Well, if I had to look back on my career, I had a lot of gaps to fill. I think the only reason I was able to fill those is I was born with a intense curiosity. I grew up with 4 sisters, 3 of them were valedictorians, and I wasn't close. I was a B and C student, but I was always curious as a kid. I learned and I taught myself a lot of things, and continued that at Dunwoody, and I continued that my whole career, just wanting to understand how things work. I went back to a choice. When I went to Dunwoody, I was trying to decide whether to be an engine mechanic or electronics. That's pretty radically different. I grew up on a farm, so tearing down tractors and things, that was my norm. And I picked something I knew nothing about, electronics, because I was curious. I wanted to understand how radios and TV worked, because I had to figure this out. I couldn't look at something and not understand how it worked. So what I'm trying to say is I think if you have a curious mind, you have a need to want to continue to learn. The only way you stay relevant and continue to grow is to suck up information and find ways to absorb it. Now, I didn't go to any colleges after I graduated Dunwoody. I went to Stanford University for, they called it a mini MBA immersion program. I got exposed to operations, marketing, sales, finance, and all that did was open the door, give me some fundamental knowledge to want to build on. And I spent my career building on what I had learned about balance sheets and income statements and cash flow analysis and a whole bunch of other things, because the foundation was put in place. But I taught myself, and the only business school I went to was business. I was in business, and I had a great place to learn things. So I think we all have to continue to keep our minds open and grow. Those that continue to invest in themselves or have a childlike curiosity, even in their older ages, are the ones that are going to excel in life. They're going to have a broad base of experience. They can relate to a lot of things. I've got composite engineers, I've got material engineers, I've got mechanical engineers, Ph.D.s, I've got salespeople, I've got operations people, and I've got to talk all those different languages. So I always say I know a little bit about a lot of things, but not a lot about anything. But that's what you have to do when you're running a company. You've got to be able to talk on all those different levels and be able to carry on conversations and lead those people. And it's like you're putting on and changing hats all day long and getting in different conversations as opposed to be a monovision view of the world.
Is that?
Well, for me, the gaps, I'd like to think I'm still working on bridging them, but the gaps were huge once I got out of a field technical position and started moving into more of the administrative operations. And ours is a small business. At the time, we had about 25 employees. And the first thing I did was realize that I don't know anything about, keeping track, keeping score. I mean, we're in business. You're in business to make money. Amazing how many businesses don't really understand what it is to make money and how they make money, or for that matter, don't make it. So I took an accounting class at night. Had some success with that, and now I could, follow on, take another accounting class. And as I got more and more into the administrative operations, I realized that the people I was interacting with had a different vocabulary and a different way of looking at things. And I would learn being around them, but I really wanted to hold my own, working with customers, working at a different level with fellow employees and suppliers, and then working with professionals, accountants, lawyers. So I decided, I should just get more broadly educated, and the last thing I want to do is take a bunch of business classes. I want to really learn what it is to be able to read and think and communicate and write. So that's when I pursued my Bachelor of Arts degree at night. Spent 4 years doing that. And I would still make the argument to this day that if you want to be a great success in business, you get the rudiments down of, accounting and a couple things like that. And then the most important thing you can do is take a really good literature class. Because if you can read the situation, if you can read the people and the plot and understand the nuances in that situation, that's what you're going to encounter in business. And you're going to see things other people don't see. And from that, you develop analytic powers and you understand the world better, and that can't hurt any of us, let alone a business person. So got the liberal arts degree, and then of course now I felt, all right, well, that was cool, let's go on and maybe study more business, but do it at a professional level with a graduate degree. And then after that, as I said, want to do some backfill and get the applied mathematics degree. And it's all really to try to fill those gaps. The more you learn, the more you realize you don't know, right? And so that was for me a driver, and I have to continually remind myself, how far I've come and how much further I have yet to go. And the gaps were huge, but they came at different times when I was ready to fill them. And that is a big deal. Not everybody's ready to learn at the same time. Like I say, if you went to my high school teachers, they would, or for that matter, my classmates, no way would they think that, I would go on to college and that kind of stuff, because I wasn't ready for it. But through time, I became ready for it, felt the need, and thankfully, there were people like you out there who were ready to help me learn. I've had some great educators over the years, and who've not only educated me, but motivated me to go on further. And we have got a great infrastructure here in the Twin Cities for adult education, even back, in the 70s and 80s when I was, going to night school. So.
Thank you. Mike?
Well, I don't know that I have any great revelation. I think one thing that the biggest gap that I experienced was, when I graduated from Dunwoody, I had that nice combination of the liberal arts degree and the technical skills. And so as I think it was Dale said, you show up the first day and you're relevant because you can work. And that's true. But as your career progresses, at least mine, all of a sudden, I'm ambitious and I want to move forward. Well, your career shifts, and so instead of managing tasks and kind of, trying to complete projects, you now are in charge of managing people. And unfortunately, people don't behave the same way, and they're a lot more challenging to manage. And so as I move forward, I think the biggest gap I found was that kind of just a skills gap in how do you manage people? How do you form a team? How do you organize a crew? We can put different terms on it depending upon the business we're in, but how do you kind of align people's goals and expectations and their skills and complete the work? When you're the worker, you can put your hands on the tools and get the job done. All of a sudden now it's more about motivating and teaching people to do that. And then as my career progressed, you end up less and less involved with those technical skills and more involved in what everyone wants to call soft skills, which is a misnomer because they're the hardest things there are to learn. And they're the things that separate the people and the businesses that are successful from the ones that are mediocre or fail, I think, are how the leaders in those companies manage their people. So that was probably the single biggest gap that I had, and the way I addressed it was, learning from people. I had mentors that taught me. I did a lot of reading. And I think a lot of it's just experience, what works and what doesn't work. I think you learn a lot from your failures in managing people. The second gap that I would address, and I think Ted spoke to it, was when I wanted to actually run the business, I needed to, again, as Ted said, speak a different language. I needed to understand accounting and finance. There's some part of the mechanics of how a business operates that if you're going to be successful, if you're going to go to a bank and say, you know, give me some money because I want to go build this business, you need to convince them that you know what you're doing. And if you can't speak intelligently to, you know, in our business, the insurance companies, because we're contractors, we take a lot of risk, to sureties and to banks, they're not going to give you the money you need to grow. So that was a gap that I addressed by going back and getting more education. And I encourage, you know, people in our business, I encourage business owners that I mentor, you know, that kind of, I know people who are very successful and have never done that, but I think one of the best ways to kind of leapfrog yourself and differentiate yourself on that part of it is to go back and get the education. If you can talk to that banker and he knows that you understand how your business flows, how the cash flows, you know where you're making money and you know where you've got challenges, they're going to help you grow your business. So those are kind of the two big areas for me.
Great, thanks. So we have a room full of technical educators from across the nation. So just what kind of general advice would you give them looking back on your education, your careers? Dale, why don't we start with you this time?
Well, I think biggest thing is probably a reflection of the question we just answered, is that there has to be continued change. If you haven't noticed, the world's kind of sped up a lot in the last few decades, and it doesn't slow down. It actually, time gets compressed and change happens. If you go back to your grandparents and you try to understand the amount of change they saw, they might have went from horses to cars. And you look at your parents, the amount of change in technology and cultural and economic changes that they've seen, and then look at your own and look at your kids. It's amazing, but the world is speeding up. That means where curriculums didn't have to change as quickly 50 years ago, now you might have a program that lasts 5 years and it may not be relevant to businesses anymore, because businesses are changing, and you're a reflection of education for business, so I think you have to keep that at the top of your mind. I know in business, one thing I've guarded against is people want to hold on to the past. You have a product and it's always made you money and never want to let it go, and if you hold on to it too long, pretty soon your business starts eroding, and you rode it too long. You didn't make change, and you've got to learn to give up things even before their end of life to move on to the next thing. And I know Dunwoody has made a lot of changes in their programs, and I think they've sped up the time of change. Tried to align relevant programs to businesses. I know they started a sewing program because there was a need for sewing, but if you can partner with businesses to fill a gap, we've got a strong medical technology base in this area here, so programs that align with medical technology are going to be important, and if you take the same curriculum but put 3 months on the end that position a technician more for medical companies, you're going to have a winning program. So I think it's just continuing to keep your mind open and change, just like businesses have to change, educators have to change. I think curriculum at its best is probably 2 to 3 years behind business, and that's if you're up to date. If you're not up to date, you're going to be 10 years behind what business needs are. So keeping that gap close and concise is going to be the challenge.
Ted?
Well, and keeping with that theme, I would, draw upon Winston Churchill, kind of paraphrase him to say, look at, for you as educators with your students, this is not the beginning of the end. It's just the end of the beginning, and there's a whole lot more to come. Once you have your degree and graduate, you're going to be in for a lifetime of continuous learning. And that's just the new norm. It's really not even new, but it is definitely the norm. The other thing I would say is, as much as business is too important to be left just to business people, like kind of the law is too important to be left to lawyers, Education is too important to our country just to be left to the academics. And so the closer we can work together across our society, particularly in, I'll just speak for myself, from business people and the education system at all levels, the more likely we are to be successful for everybody and for our country. And you know, we've just, you know, got to know that, you know, we can't stay insulated from one another and be critics. We've really got to work together, be very close, so that what people are learning is, in fact, what you, as academics, know they need to learn to be educated people, but that also is responsive to the market. Because let's face it, we live in a country where what we do defines who we are. This is a country of work. The United States, whether you like it or not, we define ourselves by what we do. You know, you go all over the world and nowhere, when you meet people, do they ask you, what do you do? Until you come here. And it comes out in the first question or two. What do you do for a living? You don't see that anywhere. It's just a defining element and an important element for personal fulfillment and success in our society. And so the education system preparing students has to be more than just you know, preparing students only for a vocation, but absolutely that is, it's not sufficient to prepare them for that, but it is necessary to prepare them for that, for a vocation. And we do that, I think, by having very close ties. And you know, thankfully, I think that message is out there, and I think there's a lot of progress been made. But I will say, I know a lot more needs to be made.
Thanks, Ed. Mike?
Well, when I reflect back on my educational career, I learned a lot from the people who were in the front of the room, teaching the courses, running the lectures, running the lab, but I learned equally as much from my classmates. And one of the things that concerns me is as the way we educate people evolves and we start doing more things online and, you know, and again, I think that's a useful tool, but I want to make sure that we keep the opportunities for people to collaborate and interact with one another, because it is where I think people learn those skills I talked about earlier. If the educational process becomes this kind of just two-way exchange between, you know, a professor or an instructor, a teacher, and a student, and there isn't time for that interaction amongst the students, I think we lose a lot. And where we're going to lose out is in the long run, we're going to lose, people are not going to show up with the social skills and those collaborative skills that they need to actually move ahead in the workplace. So I think there's progress being made. We do a lot of education for our own workforce online. It's a great tool, but I also, we always try and, when we do that, set up a time. Okay, can we get everybody together physically, or can we set up an online discussion? And it's interesting to see, you know, people go through a first phase of educational process that is more two-way communication, then give them an opportunity. Again, I'm sure you've all seen it. Someone asks a question. Well, there were 12 people that had that same question, but they didn't speak up. If we can't keep those discussions going and that kind of collaboration and interaction amongst this learning community, we lose out, and I think the people, as they move into their careers, are going to be lacking skills they need to really be successful.
Thanks, Mike. Ray?
To expand on what Mike is saying there, I think it's really important that we develop teamwork. When I went to school, we did everything by ourselves. Here's the project, go do it, come back, get your grades, so on and so forth. But with things moving as fast as they are today, we really have to rely on our employees to work as a team, 2, 3, 4, 5, and more, working together, solving problems. Our time frames are compressed to such a degree that you can't give a person a project and have them go off and work by themselves. We have to work as teams. And the ability to do that is significant. So often, and I don't have that problem now because we work very hard at finding the right employees and teaching the ones that need help to work as teams. But there was a time when we had people that it was a real challenge to get them to work with somebody else. And you might have students that you can think of that don't like to work with other people. But in today's marketplace, the value of these students when they get into the marketplace is so much higher if they can work with other people and work well with other people, and the communication skills are equally, being able to project that into their what they're learning is very important, I think.
Well, very insightful. It's always great when we can get people who've been out in industry, who've experienced success, to come together and talk with us as educators. As I think Ted's point, and the point that has been reiterated, is right on. The best model for technical education is a model where we are connected to the industries we serve in a very positive, productive way. And it's also interesting that Dale, for those of you that were here last night, we have futurists speak about the rate of change and this concept that the doubling phenomenon, and as technology doubles, the beginning part of that change in technology is relatively flat. But at the end, things really become exponential. And he gave a couple of examples. One was the cell phone that Gordon Gekko used in the original Wall Street. And the price of that cell phone was $5,000, and only 1% of the people had a cell phone. And today, I look out across the group here, I think you all have a cell phone because you're all on it right now. No. And so it's good not only for us to hear that from a perspective of here's what the futurist is saying, but it's good for us to hear that from here's what we're seeing in industry. So I hope, we were going to take some questions from the floor, but it's about 10 till. We have concurrent sessions starting at 9 o'clock, so I think it's probably best that we thank our panelists with a round of applause and move into the concurrent sessions. Thank you, Ted and Mike and Ray and Dale. Appreciate your time.